Hello, welcome to this lecture on the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. So, we were talking earlier about the decline of the Republic. Remember, there was increasing unrest. In particular, the people were growing poorer in number and becoming increasingly angry about that, right? Things are getting more difficult for the plebeians, and they're unhappy about that. And what's going to end up happening is there's going to be a split among the patricians, the aristocrats, right? The elites, the ruling class, over whether to support the traditional aristocracy, and we call those people the optimates, or to push for reform by supporting the plebeians, and those people are called the populares. So let me repeat this in slightly different words to hopefully make this a bit more clear. Basically, you've got this ruling class, right? You've got the patricians, and some of them are just like, things are fine. The plebeians are just whiny. To deal with their whininess, their complaints, we need to actually become stronger. We need more power, and those would be the optimates. You have other patricians who are saying, no, the plebeians are concerned, they're angry, they're upset. There's a lot of them. Maybe we need to reform so they don't overthrow us, or so they don't get too radical, or so we don't have civil war. And it would be good if we get ahead of the reform. Let's lead the reform. If we lead the reform, they'll like us, and maybe we won't have to give up too much. But if we let them rebel, we may lose everything. So there's this question, right? Do we try and weaken the plebeians to keep them down, strengthen ourselves? That's the optimate position. Or do we act like the populares want to and try and reform, make sure that reform is something we can live with? And I should also point out, I don't want to make the populares sound insincere. A lot of them, as we'll see, will be generals, be people who were working with the plebeians, who knew them, and I think honestly felt some concern for them. After all, they were Romans. So like I said, you've got on one side one group of people, the optimates, who want to strengthen the Senate, keep it strong, strengthen the old traditional system, don't want to change anything. And then you have the populares, who are also patricians, but who want reform, because if you don't reform, the plebeians may overthrow them. They may get more than what the patricians would like to give up. And of course, they maybe actually feel bad for the situation the plebeians are in. Now, what's going to happen is a man named Sulla is going to take the side of the Senate, the optimates, and fight against any kind of pro-plebeian reform. Right? So Sulla is going to be an optimate who wants to take the side of the Senate. He's against pro-plebeian reforms that would help the plebeians. Now, why is that a big deal? Why should we care about this Sulla guy? Because he had an army. He had massive military support. He had a loyal army. And he is going to use that army to seize power and become a dictator. Right? He's going to use that army to seize power and become a dictator. And I want to stress, when I say he becomes a dictator, I mean two things. One, I mean he takes that office. Remember, the Romans had a office actually called dictator. You were supposed to, or if you were dictator, you were given absolute power to deal with Rome's problems for 1 month. And people typically respected that. Remember, we had the example of Cincinnatus, who actually gave up power after less than a month because he had solved Rome's problems. And he wasn't concerned with using the office of dictator to strengthen his own position or to get revenge or anything like that. Sulla uses his army, like I said, to take power, to become dictator, but then he acts completely differently than Cincinnatus. For one thing, he doesn't stay dictator for a month. He basically makes himself dictator for life. He will be dictator for years. So you can see how, and we mentioned this earlier with the Gracchi brothers, how the rules that govern the Republic are kind of becoming weaker. Right? This was only supposed to last a month. Well, things are really serious, so I'm just going to make it last for the rest of my life. He actually wouldn't be dictator for the rest of his life. He would eventually retire once he thought he got everything fixed, and then he would die a year later of natural causes. To give you a sense of who this person was, on his gravestone after he died were the words, "No greater friend, no worse enemy." And I tell that story because once he seizes power, he will purge his populares enemies. So again, remember, Cincinnatus, other than going after the guy that got his son in trouble, he really didn't use his power to hurt anyone. He didn't really go after his enemies in the Senate or anything like that. But Sulla said, got to get rid of my enemies. They are dangerous. Don't want them around. And a lot of these guys that he goes after, these populares, are fellow patricians. Right? So this is a struggle among the patricians as well as their plebeian allies. And he will kill thousands. So things are really getting out of hand in Rome. He will also use his political powers to strengthen the Senate. Right? Remember, he's an optimate. He wants for a powerful Senate to keep Rome under control. And he basically, his view is, I'm going to fix things by being this really powerful, strong dictator. I'm going to fix things. I'm going to strengthen the Senate, reform Rome, so we won't have any more of this plebeian unrest. We won't have any more plebeian complaints because the system, I will strengthen the old system, and they're just going to have to live with it. But the key thing is, he broke the rules, so why can't others? Right? Sulla seems to have sincerely believed that he had fixed Rome's problems, that the plebeians would stop their complaints, and now everything would be fine, because now we have a stronger Senate. The patricians are even in firmer control, especially after he purged so many of the populares. But as we'll see, other people will also start breaking the rules. Right? Rules saying, for example, you can't be dictator for more than a month. Other people will break those rules, and then they'll undo his reforms. And like I said, he thinks that he solved the problem, but he does not resolve the basic frustration of the poor Romans. The plebeians still are frustrated. They still have lots of problems. Those problems have not been resolved. Now, after Sulla's death, the populares are able to recover. And a very important populare is a man named Julius Caesar. Right? Just to kind of give you a sense about who Julius Caesar was as a human being, I want to tell two stories. One is that he saw a statue of Alexander the Great and cried. And the reason he wept at seeing the statue of Alexander the Great was because they were about the same age, and Alexander the Great had conquered basically almost the entire known world, and Caesar said, I haven't done anything. So he was a man of great ambition. Right? He was a man of great ambition. In addition, he was also a man of great courage and resourcefulness. So when he was in his early 20s, I believe, he was on a ship that was captured by pirates. And the pirates kidnapped him and then held him for ransom. And I'm just making up the numbers here, but what I think is hilarious was he asked the pirates, he said, how much ransom are you going to ask? And they're like, we're going to ask for $50,000. And Caesar responds, oh, that's far too little. I'm worth at least $100,000. And the pirates, being pirates, would stay up late at night gambling and drinking, and Caesar would yell at them to be quiet. And the pirates thought this was hilarious. They just had a good laugh at Caesar. And Caesar told them, he said, I want you to understand this. Once my family pays the ransom, I'm going to go back to Rome, and I'm going to get a bunch of ships. I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to kill all of you. And they're like, ah, ha, ha, that's funny. You're rich, Caesar. This guy's hilarious. Get him a drink. And his family paid the ransom, and Caesar kept his word, came back to the pirates, and captured and crucified all of them. Had them all executed. So Caesar is a smart, tough, resourceful guy who would like to be like Alexander the Great. And he was, in many ways, like Alexander the Great because he was not only he was very smart, he was very politically astute, and he was an excellent general. And in particular, he was skilled at winning the affection and loyalty of his men. And one thing I want to stress, like I said, the populares, some of it I think was cynical, was like, hey, we just got to deal with these plebeians, we got to give them something so they don't overthrow us. But also, I think there was some real affection there. because Caesar does seem to have genuinely cared about his soldiers. And what that meant was, when his enemy said, this Caesar guy's getting too powerful, he's got all these, he had actually had several armies, not just one, several legions. He was getting so powerful, his enemies said, we need to get rid of this guy. And they ordered him to come to Rome so that they could put him on trial and have him punished for crimes that they accused him of. That he probably did commit, but everyone committed crimes during this time period, unfortunately. And Caesar did come back, but he brought his army with him. This was illegal. You weren't supposed to do it, but he had an army with him. So he would use that army to seize power. And then he would also have himself declared dictator for life. Though incidentally, unlike Sulla, Julius Caesar did not go around slaughtering people. Instead, he tried to follow an approach to win their loyalty. Right? And this is where Caesar, I think, was a very astute politician. He realized that you can't just go around slaughtering people. That's not going to build a system that lasts. He wanted to be someone who would heal Rome, who would bring Romans back together. Right? But he does still have himself declared dictator for life. And he would use that position then to bring in reforms. Reforms based on what the populares wanted. So he extended citizenship. He gave more people citizenship, which gave them certain privileges. He assisted the poor, often through debt relief or just outright giving them money. And he allowed immigration to newly conquered lands, which was relatively easy because he conquered the lands. He conquered a lot of France and a lot of Britain. And he's like, hey, got some land. You're poor here in Rome. You can go to that land. And so he's dealing with the fundamental economic concerns of the plebeians. So naturally, he is becoming extraordinarily popular. Right? He's become extraordinarily popular. However, he's weakening the republic. Right? He is weakening the republic. Right? He's become a dictator for life. But there's this big question, who does the republic represent? And this is one of the big issues, most significant issues with the republic by this time period. In a sense, it falls because it has ceased to represent the people of Rome. It only basically represents the interests of some of the patricians. Now, one thing I want to stress, people sometimes get this confused. Caesar was not the first Roman emperor. He's not the first Roman emperor. The reason is because he's going to be assassinated. A group of senators, believing that he is a threat to the republic and to the Senate's powers, which is correct, decide to assassinate him, believing that his death will restore the Senate to power and save the republic. One of the men who is the leaders of this assassination, a man named Brutus, he was actually descended from one of the men who helped overthrow the monarchy back when the republic was established. So he thought he was kind of following in his ancestors' footsteps. But there's going to be this attempt by the Senate to assassinate Caesar will be assassinated by a group of senators. This solves nothing. This solves absolutely nothing. In fact, it leads to a renewal of civil war. And in the civil war, you're going to have two sides, basically. You're going to have Mark Antony, who had been a loyal general of Caesar, and Cleopatra, who had been Caesar's lover and was now Mark Antony's lover. Also, more importantly, she was the Egyptian pharaoh. She was leading Egypt. And those are coins that she and Mark Antony had minted with Mark Antony's face on one side and hers on the other. To the right is Caesar's nephew / adopted son, Octavian, who would eventually take the name Augustus. So Rome is now in a civil war between these two groups, Mark Antony, Caesar's former general, and Cleopatra. And then on the other side, Augustus, who was Julius Caesar's nephew / adopted son. Now that was common in many civilizations, actually. If you didn't have a son, you would adopt a nephew. Right? So you still are kind of keeping power within the family. And one thing I should stress is, whereas the previous struggle had been kind of between the populares and the optimates, so there was kind of ideology, right? Pro-reform, anti-reform. This is more about power than ideology. they're both of the contenders are pretty much populares, right? No one's going to go away from the reforms that Caesar brought. They're too popular. Now, what's going to end up happening is Augustus is going to win. Augustus Octavian, the nephew / adopted son of Caesar, wins the war. And he will be named princeps, first citizen by the Senate. In reality, he's the first emperor. First citizen is a kind of way of saying, I'm the best, but I'm not a king, so don't try and assassinate me like you assassinated my dad, or my adopted father, right? Remember, the Romans had basically sworn an oath early on that they would kill anyone who tried to become king. So he's very careful to try and respect the Republic. So, for example, he will honor the Senate. He'll work through the Senate in order to keep the senators and the patrician class in general happy. So he is totally undoing the Republic. I mean, the Republic is basically gone now in many respects. What we have here now is an imperial system with an emperor on the top. He just keeps the trappings of the Republic to keep the Senate, the patricians happy. Right? He doesn't want to get assassinated. He wants to keep everyone relatively happy. Now, like I said, he's going to try and control the Senate. So one thing he does is he makes the Senate bigger, and he appoints his supporters to the Senate. So now there's more people in the Senate, so each vote is worth individually less. And most of the new people are on his side anyway, so that gives him control. He will also expand the empire. The empire will get a lot bigger under Augustus. And he will reward the soldiers to keep the army happy. In addition, the wealth from this empire that doesn't go to the soldiers will be shared sufficiently among the Romans. He will make sure that the economic issues that caused, in a sense, the fall of the Republic are not going to be repeated during the imperial period, at least while he's alive. And one thing also that's very important, as a way of trying to bring together Romans, he will support the cult of the emperor. Now, usually when you hear the word cult, it's kind of a negative term to describe a religion someone doesn't like. But here it simply means religious rituals based around the emperor. And it's complicated, but basically the emperor was treated as a god, sort of. I don't want to go into theology of it, but basically Augustus was kind of treated as a living god, and people would offer sacrifice to him. Now, what did this mean? It just meant they would take some incense and throw it in fire. That's it. Incense is, just like a kind of herbs or something that smells good, especially when you burn it. You throw it in fire. You pray for the well-being of Augustus and the emperor. That's it. It's not a big deal. They're not doing human sacrifice or anything like that. But this was understood as a religious ritual which treated the emperor like a god. That'll be important later on. But the key thing was people did this as a symbol of loyalty. And rituals like this helped to hold the empire together. Right? Burning and offering incense to the emperor showed that you were loyal to the emperor, that you accepted his rule. And why wouldn't you? Things are going pretty well. Augustus was extraordinarily popular. His victory ended the civil wars. His wise policies brought prosperity to the people, and he made sure that it was shared. The cost, though, was the destruction of the Republic. At the time, not that many people mourned the Republic because it had been failing. Right? It had failed to deal with the economic problems the Republic faced. And then those problems got even worse, so that it led to tyranny and then civil war. And I think this is a warning for those of us who love democracy, that we should always be on our guard, because once we fail to compromise, when we're only willing to when we just want our way and don't want to listen to anyone else, that can eventually destroy the democracy we love. But that's for now for the Republic. We're now going to continue with the Empire.